Have you ever wondered why synthetic T4 only thyroid hormones are being used as the primary treatment for thyroid patients, despite the fact that natural desiccated thyroid hormones, as well as the T3 hormone, can oftentimes be more helpful for thyroid symptoms? Hi, I'm Dr. Izabella Wentz, your thyroid pharmacist, and today I want to take you on a bit of a journey, perhaps a history lesson on the history of thyroid treatment. In today's podcast episode, I have Carter Black, a compounding pharmacist who has been in practice for over 40 years, and he's going to go take us down the road into the history of thyroid treatment, how Synthroid became a household name, why natural desiccated thyroid treatments as well as T3 medications fell out of favor. We'll also get into little known controversies around thyroid medication absorption, adrenal dysfunction, and how women have been really undertreated by our medical system and what we can do about it. I hope that you'll join and dive in with me on this episode. This is an episode from The Thyroid Secret, which is a documentary that I recorded interviewing over 100 experts on thyroid health. And this is actually one of the interviews that I recorded to create the 7-part documentary series. Now, the documentary series is called The Thyroid Secret, and it's available on my website, Thyroid Pharmacist, for purchase. However, in honor of World Thyroid Day, I'm actually releasing the entire documentary series for free, so you can watch it over the weekend. So mark your dates for May 23rd through 26th for Memorial Day weekend. You can watch all 7 episodes, and we dive into what it feels like to have Hashimoto's and hypothyroidism and thyroid disease, and then all of the different innovative therapies that we can utilize, such as natural desiccated thyroid, low-dose naltrexone. We also dive into nutrition and then some of the different triggers that not many people may be aware of. If you wanted to get more information on The Thyroid Secret and sign up for the free weekend to watch, you can go to thyroidpharmacist.com/TTS. And in the meantime, I hope that you enjoy the history of thyroid disease treatment with myself and Carter Black.
Carter, thank you so much for taking the time to share your expertise with me. Can you tell us, how long have you been a pharmacist?
Oh, I graduated pharmacy school in '74.
Wow.
But I worked several years before that in a local drugstore.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the history of thyroid treatment?
In the late 19th century, they discovered treatment with actually sheep extract would affect thyroid. Then as it progressed, we went through desiccated beef thyroids, and then it was porcine thyroid, pig thyroid. And they finally settled on pig thyroid because it seemed to be our closest genetic relative. So, and it's been up until the 70s mainly treated with thyroid extract from animals based on metabolic rates, if they could figure it, and that was a very difficult thing in the past. But mostly signs and symptoms. We didn't have the lab tests. The lab tests really started developing in the late 60s, and finally the first TSH was commercialized in the early 70s.
So before that, before the 70s, the standard of care or the treatment for people with an underactive thyroid was natural desiccated thyroid derived from the thyroid glands of pigs.
Right. And they were put together early before there was any commercialization by pharmacists, and they would more or less have a crude balance. And it wasn't as critical with desiccated thyroid because it wasn't microgram amounts, it was milligram amounts, and it depended on the skill of the pharmacist. And there really weren't any compounding organizations at the time. So just about every pharmacist compounded. And then there were commercial tablets, and those were manufactured to a standard, not the standards that they're made now, but they were right after World War II.
Now, we know that synthetic thyroid, Synthroid, has been the number one prescribed drug out of every prescription in 2 of the last 3 years.
Right.
And so this has become the standard of care. This is now what every patient is getting.
Right.
And of course, we know, and we'll get into this, that this is not always the best treatment for them.
Right.
Now, what happened between the 1970s and now that there's such a big discrepancy between getting this type of treatment? That was what everybody was getting, and then now everybody's getting T4.
Well, basically, a group of scientists found out that they could patent something. So if you can patent something, you can be exclusive. And then when you applied to the FDA and meet their standards and put the drug out, and you had to do quite a bit of research at that time, and it was expensive, but not in today's dollars expensive. Now it takes about $500 million to bring a drug to market. Then regulations were a lot looser, and getting people to cooperate in clinical trials were a lot easier. In the late 60s, Synthroid came out, and then they started marketing it against Armour Thyroid or the compounded Thyroid USP, and there were also Thyroid USP tablets. Mm-hmm. Armour had a very high standard at the time, and but the marketing was so powerful for a patented drug. And at that time, you could do a lot of things to market, and you didn't have to have all the clinical trials, all the clinical information. And there were a lot of good old boy things that were done to get them on the market. So to hand it to them, it was a very good drug. Mm-hmm. And it did show good blood levels, so they could actually get blood levels. And then the advent of the TSH test in the early 70s really was a help to them.
Tell me more about the Good Old Boys Club and the marketing dollars behind Synthroid. How did that come about? Like, what were they telling doctors?
Well, they were telling doctors that they were smearing naturally desiccated thyroid because there were some inconsistencies, a few reports here and there. And doctors did have a little bit of harder time adjusting their thyroid patients just because it wasn't all about tests. It was more about symptoms. Mm-hmm. And it was a lot more hands-on at the time. When TSH came about, then basically it was just give the drug and get a response. And the symptoms really were taken into account, but it became more of a lab test oriented, and it took the hands-on care out of it a little bit.
So it was like they said the TSH becomes elevated when you have thyroid disease, and we have a drug that suppresses TSH. Mm-hmm. Therefore, this drug works, and they completely ignored the patient. They didn't look at the patient anymore, and they started focusing more on the test.
Right. They focused on the test, and, I will admit that, maybe anywhere from 60 to 80% of the patients were fine with just, the Synthroid or the T4. But as you and I both know, there's a subset of patients with a genetic defect or patients that T3 just naturally helps their mental capacities, helps them lose weight. They just feel better on a combination product.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And as a pharmacist and being the thyroid pharmacist, I think for me, I tend to see the people that don't feel their best on the T4 containing medications. So it's hard for me to estimate a percentage of how many are actually better with T3 versus the ones that aren't. I'm seeing a lot of the people that are failing T4 medications. What's been your experience?
Well, I see a more general population. But the patient that I do get is usually the troubled one that their TSH is stable and they don't feel well. Mm-hmm. So then we have to work it through the functional medicine programs of adrenal, gut, toxins. And that's a harder patient to see, and it does skew your view of how effective it is. I do consult with the doctors and on their TSH management. Yeah, many patients are just fine on T4 only, mm-hmm. but there are many that are not. if you read the literature, some say it's 60% are fine with T4 only. Some say it's less. Endocrinologists claim 90% are fine with T4. But then you ask them about the 10%, and they have no answer. So it's something that, is our bread and butter, but not for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Now, so in many cases, you see that people benefit from having a T3 containing medication added to the regimen and added to the mix.
Right. It's not for the faint of heart. I mean, you do have to deal with all the other things that surround this. I mean, if you don't take care of the stress, yourself, and I've learned from you that stress will drive reverse T3. There's so many things that affect the T4 to T3 conversion. I mean, in your book, you have like a chart of about 30 things you've researched: stress, other medications, cigarette smoking, weight, da-da-da. You really have to work that up. And that's a more involved workup than just read the TSH and give a drug. And even read the TSH, we'll try naturally desiccated thyroid. So it's all the things that go with it.
I wanted to ask you about what you thought was the reason why doctors aren't using this treatment. Is it because these patients are harder to manage?
I think it is because they're harder to manage. And I think that if they've tried it and they've had, they've had some failures, then that sours them right away. But they don't realize that they have to do the other things to make it, the NDT to respond linearly. And that's what confuses doctors. There are some people that you just put them on an equivalent to the T4, and we have charts for that they do just great. Mm-hmm. And that's been a big part of our treatments. And but then there's also a subset that you put them on NDT, directly equivalent, and they don't do well. And so those are the patients that we have to work up with other methods.
And I think this is a really excellent point why patients should work with somebody who's knowledgeable on how to use natural desiccated thyroid rather than ordering stuff online by themselves or trying to convince their family doctors to prescribe a medication they're not familiar with.
Right. And that's why probably some of the problems with NDT are because the family doctor, was maybe bullied by their patient to, here, I want this, and doctors are there to help their patients, and they want to do anything they can. So naturally, they'll write the prescription, and then they see the patient worsening, and they don't understand why. And that's because there's so many other things. I mean, sometimes it does translate exactly. You and I have both had that experience. You just give the equivalent, and we've got them in our books. When we went to pharmacy school, it was T4, T3, this is what the dose is. And yeah, it works for a big part of the population. But then there's the one where you do the equivalent and it doesn't work. And that's where all the learning that you and I have gone through and, your teachings have been so valuable.
Mm. I also wanted to ask you about the history of T3 and how that has perhaps influenced doctors' prescribing behaviors.
Absolutely. We have to, first of all, talk about T4 and T3 and the difference. T4 is the medication we give, Synthroid or levothyroxine, and it is the hormone that is expressed by the thyroid. But to be active, most of its action comes about as conversion to T3. Mm-hmm. And and I know that there's a problem with T4 to T3 conversion. So in that case, if we can't get a person to convert, then we have to give T3 itself. So T4 was isolated early in the 1900s, and in the 50s, T3 was isolated. So we started knowing about that. And so then we started being able to express our thyroid compounds in those manners. And then they made a commercial T3. So in the 60s, you could get T3. And then in the 80s, fast forward, people found out that it would pick up the metabolism. And that is one of the problems with hypothyroidism. Your metabolism is low, so you probably don't have enough T3. And you and I know that we want to optimize T3 to the upper levels of the norm. So when that was commercially available, Cytomel was a brand name when it came out. Now you can get it generically. But when that came out, the doctors found out that they could form a weight loss clinic. And they could use T3 only because it would act right away. And then they combined that with amphetamines. I remember this very well. And they would give that and a diuretic. So think about the combination of T3, amphetamines, and a diuretic to an overweight woman that wants to lose weight. She's going to lose weight really quickly. But that scares you and I to give someone T3 in a euthyroid patient or somebody with normal thyroid. What's that going to cause? Well, that's going to cause admissions to hospital emergency rooms and hospital. Believe me, that resident endocrinologist that handled that patient in the hospital for thyroid toxicosis or thyroid storm, those are touch and go situations no one wants to ever deal with. And the endocrinologists practicing now in the 80s had to deal with this, and they are averse to T3 like nobody's business because they just saw what happened. And it was misused by these weight clinics that just took advantage of people by giving them the wrong medicine. And so now it's really kind of a hard sell to endocrinologists with T3. And the other part of it is you have a large company marketing to them that's saying everybody converts from T4 to T3. There's no problems. And even PubMed and all the journals, are telling them, all you need is T4. So it's a hard sell to endocrinologists. But there are many out there that do realize that it's a good medicine.
And for the people that saw patients on this combination of T3 medications, amphetamines, stimulant drugs, diuretics,
oh my God,
in a person who had normal thyroid function, they were given these medications, and this was causing them to have a disease. And what were some of the consequences of that? What were some of the things that people were dealing with?
Coma, hyperthermia, naturally heart palpitations.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we always watch for, cardiac, thyroid storm. And then the consequences of a thyroid storm, now you've got a patient that you can't control their thyroid because they cause brain damage and heart damage. And, this is a huge management problem. And to get their thyroid under control after a thyroid storm, years. I mean, it's even the recovery from, thyroid surgery is a touchy thing. It's a couple of years before you can get that normalized. And you and I both have patients that go up and down for several months until we can get that under control.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a scary situation. And I think really puts things in perspective as to what some of the misuses of medications can create, because I feel like, unfortunately, some patients believe that getting on thyroid medications, that they should get on them at any cost.
Right.
And, to have more thyroid hormone is not always a good thing. Thyroid hormones are Goldilocks hormones, right? So we want to have just the right amount. And so we're not advocating for people to take doses that are too high for them. We're just advocating that they get on a dose that's right for them and a combination that's right for them.
Right. And you never want a patient to think that I'm going on thyroid medicine to lose weight. Unfortunately, that's so conscious in our society and such a it's such a big weight for women to carry, in two ways.
Yeah.
It's a double entendre, but it's something that they have to carry around, that I have to lose weight. And thyroid medicine looks like an easy out, but it's not. It's more for health and that you feel better. So I agree with you.
Can you talk about the black box warning of thyroid medications? I know some people in the natural health world have attached to the warnings in thyroid medications, and they talk about the black box warning, and they talk about some of the side effects. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and how relevant is that to a person with hypothyroidism versus a person who has normal thyroid function?
Right. Black box warning by the FDA is a mandated. It's just like the Beers criteria for management of the elderly. And I think what you're talking about is mostly the cardiac effects. And they're not that big of a deal if you know how to manage the thyroid medicine. So it has to be, the prescribing of the thyroid medicine has to be in the hands of someone that knows what they're doing and is not an amateur at this. So black box warning, it is something, it's the liability of the prescriber has to know about this. But it's also, if you explain it to the patient, what the medication is, what the side effects are, what they can expect to look for, and to have them notify you right away. I think that solves that problem.
Now, you've trained a lot of physicians on how to properly use thyroid hormones. Can you share some of these gold nuggets here with us?
Well, as far as, physicians worry about variable TSH, one annual, and it'll be up, next it'll be down. They don't know where it should be. And some of it is comparing apples to apples, oranges to oranges. You and I have settled on giving the lab test as early as we can in the morning, no medicine, and trying to compare that to the next the next lab. And that's important, because someone that comes in at 12 o'clock and has a TSH is going to be different from 9 o'clock taking their medicine, or at 4 o'clock after their. So some of it is testing, repeating the proper testing. Others, physicians struggle with not knowing, the potencies of the medicines. I really am very happy that if a physician calls me, if they'll give me the scenario and I can help them choose a dose.
Do you wish more physicians would turn to pharmacists to help them manage thyroid medications?
I really do. I mean, we're their coach, their advocate for their patient. And I just had a patient that was on thyroid medicine for maybe 10 years, and they didn't know they had to take it on an empty stomach. It's incredible. And then, as you have said many times, taking it with lemon juice in the morning helps absorption. Not drinking coffee, with it, which can lower the blood level. I mean, there's so many things. As pharmacists, we need to do a better job. I don't know where this woman was getting her medicine, but that makes me feel bad because our profession didn't do a good job. So, in that case, yes, I wish doctors would ask us about everything, really.
Now, how should a person take thyroid medications?
Well, they need to take it the same way every time, basically, and get their testing the same way every time. So I always tell my patients the first thing, leave it on their bedstead, take it as soon as they get up. And your idea of lemon water is excellent. I mean, that hits two birds with one stone, helps the digestion, plus it helps absorption. And then if you can allow 60 minutes before you take in any food, and no coffee. And when you take your breakfast, that's fine. But your supplements, now that can, if they have minerals in them, that can combine with your medication also. Many times we will be splitting the T3 dosage, which we can talk about later, but that needs to be on an empty stomach also. So usually that I like early afternoon to late afternoon for their evening meal, or in the middle of the afternoon if we can work that in. If not, we can take all the dose in the morning, and usually that has fine outcome.
Yeah, depending on the person, you always want to individualize it. So whether you're doing medication that has T4, T3, a combination of both, whether you're doing once a day or twice a day dosing, you always want to keep these factors in mind, and you always want to make sure that you're taking medications on an empty stomach.
Right.
And, space out your calcium, magnesium by at least 4 hours, because that can really impair the absorption, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And they don't even realize that their multivitamin has those minerals in it, or they're taking mineral water. Mineral water has, so that's not something that's thought of either. If I had a patient that was, drank mineral water all day, and they take their thyroid with mineral water, and I go, that might be some of our problem. So, getting back to why you get variable TSH, there's another thing, diet, what they're taking it with. And the medication, there's quite a few interactions with thyroid medicines. PPIs, the Nexiums, and the proton pump inhibitors like Prilosec, those are, those interact with thyroid medicines if you take, and it's common to take those in the morning, and if you have a dose of thyroid. And so a product that's resistant to that is Tirosint, which has no fillers or binders. It's like in an oil. So many times we'll revert to that if we're having a problem with our patient and getting variable TSH.
Yeah, that was one of the biggest drug interactions I used to see when I was working as a consultant pharmacist, is people were taking all these medications with their thyroid medications, such as proton pump inhibitors and all these things that could impair the absorptions of thyroid hormones. And even coffee can completely impair the absorption of thyroid hormones.
Right.
And so, there was a study done in Italy a few years back with Italians drinking espresso with their levothyroxine medications, and they were not absorbing their medication, so their TSH was all over the place. And then, of course, a different set of Italian researchers also studied Tirosint, and they found that, sure enough, you could have your espresso with Tirosint.
Yeah, good information, and something that you have to consider. So if you can't do without your coffee, we've got to take this medicine. It's just individualized medicine, and I think that's what you and I are advocates for. But the patient has to be willing to work with you, and the doctor has to be willing to work and find these things out. I mean, sometimes I don't find things out until like a sideways comment just as they were leaving or something. You really have to be perceptive as someone that is treating a patient, to be perceptive. And you do have your checklists, but still you do learn things and you need to apply it. And it is through experience too.
So one of the things that I don't think people are aware of is that there's a bit of controversy behind Synthroid and some of the marketing that went along with it. Can you share that with us?
Well, the manufacturer of Synthroid, or the representative of the manufacturer, that company has changed many times. I think it went from Flint, Boots, and then Knoll, or maybe the other way around, and now Abbott owns it. And they want to defend the brand, and rightly so. It's a good quality medicine, but people ask me, can I use the generic? And I say, yes, you can use the generic as long as you use the same brand of generic. We're talking about microgram doses. And it's really important to be consistent. And so we talked a little bit about interactions and when to take it and how to take it. And it's also very important about the tablet components or the excipients. So what's made up. And so various generics will have different components. Many people like Synthroid, and they're willing to pay the money for it. But the history of that is that when it went generic, there was a lot of differences, and the market just went a little crazy for that. Varying TSHs, nobody knew what was going on. And I don't know if you remember that. That was the movement when they had narrow therapeutic index drugs. It was as the generic market was developing. And more and more, the payers of the medicine were demanding generics. And many companies got into the market. And there were certain medications that were very critical to patients, and they labeled them as narrow therapeutic index medicines. And one of them was Synthroid, or levothyroxine, and another was warfarin, or the blood thinner. And obviously, a little bit of difference in each one of those could cause major problems. So in the late 90s, I think 1997, the FDA just had it with everybody. And so they decided that all levothyroxine was going to have to resubmit a new drug application. They were going to have to redo their samples in patients, and they were going to have to submit it to the FDA, and they had like 5 years to do this, and if they wanted to stay on the market. Well, everybody did that except the holder of the patent for it. They decided they were the standard and they didn't have to do it. And, you know, that's fine. If I were the executive, why spend money to do all these clinical tests when I already had the market standard? But the FDA wasn't so happy with them. So they actually just told them they'd be off the market if they didn't do it, and finally they caved in. During all of that, there was a study out of UCLA that was very interesting, and I think it was Knoll at the time, Knoll Pharmaceuticals. It was like almost a made-for-TV movie, and where they asked researchers to prove that their medicine was superior to generics, and the information didn't bear that out. So Knoll tried to suppress that, and it kept going forward to the next owner of the patent. And so finally there was a settlement, and someone had to pay a lot of money because of suppression of the research. And now all the generics are, the narrow therapeutic index thing just kind of went away because many of the companies now are very large that make generics, and they're actually on the order of sales almost comparable to, you know, like the other pharmaceutical manufacturers of branded names. So the generic programs are very well run now. It's not like when everything started out. And I think a lot of the doctors will demand no generics just because they're still in that mindset of the 60s and 70s when generics were first coming out. There weren't the standards we have now. The FDA didn't have the standards they had. And we don't need narrow therapeutic index anymore because everyone has to stay with the standard. The marketing, I mean, Synthroid, as you know, is still the #1 medicine on the market. So, and there's a reason, because they do keep it consistent, although they can't say that they've never had recalls, because they have. They've changed their excipients, they've changed their dyes along the years, but they have a good product, and I use it if my patient insists on using it, or the doctor insists on using it. But the generics are fine, but the caveat in it is that they do need to keep with one brand. And if the pharmacy is stocking multiple brands and changing, then it's going to cost our patient more lab tests, which is not in their interest. So they have to advocate for themselves to get the same brand.
Same brand every month. And, you know, so what you're saying is that the manufacturer of Synthroid sponsored studies to show that Synthroid was superior, and when the studies didn't show that, they try to suppress the information.
They did suppress it, unfortunately, and they did that for several years. But when it was sold, the researchers finally published their results, and when it was published. The FDA naturally looked at it, and I think they had had enough. So they just made everybody recertified.
There are some people where levothyroxine, Synthroid, or T4 medications are just not going to help them as much as a T3 containing medication would. What are some of the benefits of T3 medications for patients that benefit from them?
Well, in my experience, not everybody does well with T4, or they will normalize on their labs, but they still won't feel well. So if I get someone that's not converting or not optimizing, then I'll turn to some combination of T4, T3. I haven't got anyone with T3 only, but I've participated in treatments of T3 only. That's a little bit more sophisticated than I'm willing to do, but I do like to use T4 and T3. T3, then you don't have to depend on the conversion. So that subset, this is individualized medicine, and it's that subset of patients that don't have the genetic defect, they have that. And also the ones that just feel better on T3. Seems to help mood. It just helps their metabolism a lot better. And when I get a patient like that, then I'll use either naturally desiccated thyroid, or I'll even do a compounded medicine. I do like the 4:1 ratio, and T3 is usually about 4 times stronger than T4. So if you're replacing T4, it's 4 times stronger. So you would take out part of that T4 dose, let's say 5 micrograms of T3 would be equal approximately to 20 micrograms of T4. So then we would take out some of the T4, make it T3, and either look for an NDT dose that is there, equivalent to that, or we'll compound it. So I found, just as a compounding pharmacist, I had a lot of luck with that, because then I get rid of all the binders and all the fillers, and I can control that. And I'll even use time release, or I use immediate release. I will use time release if I have no gut issues. If I have gut issues, I cannot use time release, and then I have to use immediate release for both of the medications.
Yeah, I've seen some of the patients with gut issues, and the Hashimoto's patients, when they use suspended release compounds, they actually don't absorb them as well.
Right.
And they may be taking thyroid medications, but it's as though they were taking maybe a quarter or half of the dose. We don't really know how much, depending on their gut issues, how much they're going to be absorbing of that medication.
Right. That's probably a patient also that's not going to do well on NDT too, until you get their gut better, because they'll perceive those proteins that are also in the NDT as foreign invasions, so the leaky gut people. So that's a great patient for compounded. And then we can really move around the doses any way we want to. And at that point, then, as you've so much advocated, then we can advocate optimized T4 and an optimized T3. Look at the TSH. As long as we're not suppressing it too much, we don't worry about it, and let that recover, and see how the patient is. It's individualized medicine, going back to that again.
It's so important what you just talked about. Can you talk about when, in your experience, when you would think about doing a natural desiccated thyroid for a patient?
I would think about them. The stressed patients would do well on an NDT as long as their gut issues aren't severe. And I've had some good luck just translating directly with our equivalent charts. So they've been good, and they do kind of feel better. And there are other things in that naturally desiccated thyroid. There's so many compounds in there. And those are good things for most people and bad things for some people with leaky gut. So it's really individualized with the patient. So you can't just think one thing fits every patient. You have to look at each patient. But many people, just translating it will be fine, and they do feel better with that.
And when would you think about using a compounded thyroid medication?
I would think about compounded medication if I had a gut issue patient, because those proteins in the NDT I've found just aggravate everything, and they're not absorbing, they're not responding, and I do still use the ratios from the NDT, the 4-to-1, even though that's, there's a lot of controversy and a lot of disagreement, and we have a colleague that says 11-to-1, there's others, it's all 14-to-1, 3-to-1. That doesn't bother me so much because you and I, we just try to optimize T4 and T3 so we don't worry about ratios. And we look at TSH as a guideline, but not the end-all, be-all.
And Carter, I was really lucky to find you in my healing journey. You were my compounding pharmacist, and you helped me get optimized on my thyroid medications with compounded T4, T3. But we know not all T4, T3 compounds are created equally. So how does a person find a pharmacist they can trust?
Basically going through the organizations. I work with PCCA, which is Professional Compounding Centers of America. They're very good in equipping their pharmacists to compound properly. There's also International Academy of Compounding Pharmacists. What you want a pharmacy that will give you a consistent dose and someone that will guarantee quality, and that's the most important thing. So these people by, if they're in the organizations, if they've further certified with PCAB, which is Pharmaceutical Compounding Board of, it's a board that certifies compounding pharmacists. And this is a further where you submit samples for tests. Also, the reputation of the pharmacy. Are they involved in the community? Does the store look well kept when you walk in? I mean, it's really important to trust your pharmacist. You can usually find out from what doctors and pharmacists around how they regard the pharmacy too.
Carter, you came into my life at a really difficult time for me. So I had been diagnosed with Hashimoto's, and I was on thyroid medications, and I wasn't getting better. And I was looking for something that would help me. I came across adrenal fatigue, and I read all these different websites that said it was fake, that it didn't exist. And you were the first person that I trusted that told me to look into my adrenals. And you know what? Looking into my adrenals made such a huge difference for me. I found out that I had stage 3 adrenal dysfunction, and taking the treatments for adrenal dysfunction helped me recover from my fatigue, from my anxiety, from so many other symptoms that I was suffering with. So I want to say thank you for that. Why do you think that doctors, most healthcare professionals, say that adrenal dysfunction is a made-up disorder and that it doesn't actually exist?
Basically, it's almost a leap of faith. And it's just like sometimes in my field, it's your hormones. You can blame it on hormones. You can blame it on stress. I think physicians don't know how to manage stress other than using Xanax or anti-anxiety medicine such as that, or probably an antidepressant. And if the stress doesn't respond to that, they don't really understand nutrition to support the adrenals, the adaptogens, and the lifestyle things. Telling your patient to get some sleep is one thing, and then giving them the tools to get some sleep is another thing. And then there's the whole saliva test thing, which is very accurate for cortisol. I think it's so prominent in saliva that even I could open up a lab and have a cortisol, reading, but cortisol is excreted into the saliva in a dependable amount, and you can tell at that point if someone's under stress. The problem is that it is a long learning curve, and the management of a stressed patient is hard, and it's a long interview. And unfortunately, many doctors don't have that luxury. And I don't fault them for it. Just because, if they're getting paid by an insurance company, the insurance company is dictating our practice. So they're dictating, 5, 10-minute visits. And you can't treat a patient for stress because they're stressed by being there. You're stressed as a doctor trying to treat them. So what's the outcome going to be? So the doctors that have gotten out of that rat race and started realizing adrenal fatigue or what we probably more properly define as a HPA axis dysfunction, because you can't be adrenally fatigued, but it's a good word to kind of couch it, the concept. So I think it's a very hard thing to manage, and you have to take into account lifestyle, nutrition, sleep, and then even, some Chinese herbs that, we use like adaptogens.
Now, you've been a pharmacist for 42 years now?
Yes.
Yeah. You're my go-to medication resource. Do you think that there's more to treating the thyroid than optimizing thyroid hormones?
Oh, absolutely. It's stress right away. You have to get that under control. You have to get the sex hormones under control. You have to get the gut under control. I have problems with NDT therapy when I don't have the gut under control. So, trying to manage all of this, it's a complicated thing, and it takes a real individualized therapy through a long interview. And I enjoy that. I enjoy talking with people and trying to find out what their root cause is. Where did we hear that? And then trying to treat them.
You specialize in helping women recover their health.
Yes.
What brought you into that work?
I realized that I had this love of helping women. We had a very large practice. I was in a compounding pharmacy that did women's health. And so I was the person that would answer the questions for the women. And so then I started getting more and more learning about this. And this was before we could go on the computer and do a webinar. So I actually had to go to seminars. I had to buy books, and you couldn't buy them off the internet. You had to go to the bookstore. Women's health has always been, as I got further and further into women's health, I found out that they're not treated the same in our healthcare system. They're marginalized on heart health, which is their biggest problem. The biggest killer of women is heart attacks. And they are ordered fewer stress tests. They have more at-risk heart attacks. And when I saw that, when you delve into the research with women, you see that even their hormones, they were decided that they should never have hormones. And that was a real tragedy too, without understanding what the process of it was. You can even see it in, the libido treatments. There's plenty of things for men, but what is there for women? So that's really an unfairness to women too. And to see this gap in treatment and the unfairness, I just got more and more aware that we need to help our women.
That's so beautiful and it's so important. And I wish more doctors and healthcare professionals were like you, because I do think that there is a disadvantage to being a woman in the healthcare system. We're not taken as seriously as men are. So how many women with thyroid disease are told that it's all in their heads?
Right, and that's a really unfortunate. I mean, we're painting the medical profession with a broad brush, and there's very good physicians that are committed to women's health. But just generally, and even the insurance companies, they're part of the problem. They're now even dictated how many mammograms you can get, how many pap smears you can get. They're refusing treatments. And if a doctor decides a treatment, and it should not be refused. I mean, just because an insurance company doesn't think it's right, they can't afford it. I'm just furious with the process, but hopefully we're going to make some progress in the future.
So do you feel like the insurance companies are having too much control in our medical system right now?
They do. I have such empathy for the medical practices and the doctors that are trying to, they went into this to help people. And they're not able to help people because of the insurance limitations. They decide on a therapy and they're overridden. They write a prescription and the pharmacy can't fill it. So, and they're dictated how long they can see a patient. So it has to be some sort of reform somewhere. And I don't know where it's coming from, but I always have confidence in the future, so I hope it will.
I hope so too, because I know that there are so many doctors and pharmacists, and we all want to help people. That's why we went to school for all those years. We want to see people heal. We want to see them getting better. And it's frustrating for us when we only have a few minutes to spend with the person.
Right.
And when we don't have time to dig deeper with them. And I think that's a big challenge.
Absolutely. And the doctors do the best they can. They try everything, and they try to use ancillary people, healthcare professionals, to help them so they can get to the proper diagnosis and treatment. They're using technology. That's helping somewhat. But still, the hands-on, the thing that they enjoy, they're being cheated out of. And that is a really something that I think the population should demand, that their insurance company reimburse their doctors better. Is my opinion.
And why do you think it's gotten to this point where the insurance companies have so much control over our health and our lives?
I think we've let them do that. We've signed contracts. I know that as pharmacists, we were a cash-based business when I started out. And every prescription was $5. And if it went over $5 in the 60s, the patient went to the pharmacy down the street because there was a drugstore in every corner. And then the insurance companies came in with these prescription programs, sold them to the large companies, and we were getting reimbursed very well, actually even better than it was a cash prescription. So we signed up on all of them. And then once they had the market, then they could dictate to us what they reimbursed us. And so you had the choice, either keep your patient base, fill prescriptions for your neighbors, or send them away and only fill for cash. And it was very hard for, the small drugstores to send people away. We can't sign that contract. It caused the demise of little neighborhood pharmacies. And it's actually why I got into compounding pharmacy, because it was the only avenue that we could help patients and really be engaged in their treatment and still make money, because we were making the medications and the patients paid cash, and the insurance companies wouldn't reimburse us for those prescriptions, but the patients were very happy with it. So that's how I got into compounding, and the rest is history.
There's a lot of craziness going around about compounding right now, and there are regulations that are being pushed every few months. I feel like we see something new where it's, some mistakes occurred and people want to take compounding away. And there have been some amazing treatments that are only available as compounded medications. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Absolutely. There were some bad operators doing some very slipshod work, and it was very greedy. They sold bulk compounds not made to standards, and this hit the national press, and so naturally it was turned in, all compounding is bad. Compounding, what you see is it's not regulated. Compounding is regulated. Compounding is, every compounder His license is governed by their state board. They're inspected now. There's more inspections into compounding pharmacies, which is kind of inconvenient, but it's necessary. I can see it from the regulatory side of it. From my side of it, it's not pleasant, but I can see why they're doing it. They talk about things that we make are not FDA approved. Not true. Everything that we make are made with formulas that are approved generally and with FDA approved medicines. Every time you go into the hospital, if you get an IV, that is a compounded drug not approved by the FDA. So anybody that's listening to this has probably had an IV. They got an FDA, non-approved FDA drug. And that happens thousands of times in hospitals. So then you have the large pharmaceutical companies that are kind of blowing, air on this fire because they're threatened a little bit because, a third of hormone prescriptions now are made by the compounding pharmacists. And that market keeps growing bigger because the baby boomers are having problems with hormones, and they're finding that these standard treatments, there's not a lot of alternatives available, and they need individualized medications because one woman is not the same as the other. The common thing that we talk about in PCCA is every woman is a snowflake. So now snowflake is the same, so we have to individually compound to each woman. And what works with one won't work with the other. And that's the sophistication in hormone compounding. And that's why compounding is so important. I mean, I got my start with thyroid patients by making dye-free, corn-free, lactose-free, vegetable capsule medicines, for their regular prescriptions. And people felt wonderful after using them. And that was my first exposure to thyroid patients. And then some doctors around us started, using compounding pharmacists for their thyroid medicines. So we had to up our game for that. And, if you go to a good compounding pharmacist, he'll have information available to where they send their medicine for testing, their lot numbers, and their quality assurance, because each batch that comes out have to be certified with quality assurance. So
there are a few things that you taught me, compounded medications, that are not available. So one of them is cromolyn, used for people with intestinal permeability or leaky gut. Can you tell me more about that?
Sure. What happens is a physician will read an article and they'll come to you and they'll say, can this be done? So the process is then we contact our association. Has anybody in our association had experience with this? And then we are able to get the drug and make it to specifics in that study. So this is the way treatments happen. And like many things, sometimes these treatments are so successful that a large company will lock onto that, see that it works, and they'll try to patent it. A lot of the compounded pharmacy medications can't be done because they're so common, But in that case, that's something that if someone wanted to, the supply of that certain chemical is so limited that someone could patent that if they were willing to spend the $500 million to get it on the market. But if not, compounding pharmacists can compound that for a physician that knows how to use it.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking for information on how compounded medications can be very innovative, and so we're trying to give people some secrets.
Well, cromolyn is an interesting compound because it can help with leaky gut, and obviously, getting the gaps closed so that they can have less diarrhea, less stomach irritation, so they can have less bloating. They can eat food that they normally can't eat. We have patients, you and I both have patients, that their spectrum of foods have so narrowed down that, they're almost on water and toothpicks. So this can expand the amount of foods that they can eat. And it's a way of suppressing the response by the gut until we can close up those leaky gut gaps in this way, rather than some of the other treatments. That it's another option.
A lot of times people feel like they don't have a lot of options, and you can use medications, and when you use them in an innovative and appropriate way, you can help yourself on your healing journey, and you can help yourself addressing the root causes. So we know that leaky gut or intestinal permeability is a very common root cause, and getting a compounded medication can actually help you with that.
Right. And this is not just something fly-by-night treatment. I mean, this is actually based on information that someone at a university has looked at and tried on patients. And so that's the way innovative treatments come about.
And then you also created an innovative treatment as well. So we were talking a bit about how there are so many things for men's libido, and unfortunately for women, we know that libido can be a big symptom of thyroid disease, and it's not one that women often share with their doctors. There's a lot of shame and stigma around that, and then there's also this thing of like, okay, well, what can I actually do to help with that? And
right.
There are things that you can do.
Right. Libido is a real intimate subject, and I feel bad for women that they don't want to discuss it, or they have lost their joie de vivre. What's that?
Joie de vivre.
Joie de vivre.
Yeah.
So I have been faced with that so many times and looked for answers, and so PCCA provided me for some many different formulas for libido, and I would get results with one, not with another, and so I just kind of put all the ingredients in one, and different receptors, different, bringing blood flow and response to the area, and this worked out. So it was a little bit of luck, and seeing what was available, and then putting them all together.
Mm-hmm. And what were the benefits that women saw once they started using this compounded formulation that you developed?
Well, it was more of a topical Viagra, and as a matter of fact, I used to put Viagra in one of my versions, and because if the husband is willing, or partner is willing, the mate has to be willing too, and it's a two-way street. So it helped with response, it helped with desire. I mean, if it has to be mental and physical, and sometimes the mental was there and the physical wasn't there, or the physical wasn't there and the mental was there. So it seemed to help that situation.
Mm-hmm. And that's such an important topic because, one of my goals with this documentary is to dispel some of the myths and share these secrets with people, because a lot of us feel like we're very alone when we're struggling with a chronic health condition, and we feel like we're the only one that's suffering with this, and there's unfortunately shame surrounding
Right.
that suffering, and that just makes things worse. So thank you for bringing that out into the open. I also want to talk a little bit about hormones, if that's okay with you.
Yes.
And I know that is one of your big passions.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some things that women should know about getting their hormones optimized? How do we go about that? And there's a lot of noise out there, for lack of a better word, when it comes to women's hormones.
The years around menopause are very, very important. The 5 years before, the 5 years or 10 years after, those are critical in a woman's life. The reason being is this is when you lose most of your bone mass. This is when your heart is at risk. This is when you start losing mental capacity. There's several papers out that if you have hot flashes at menopause, physical hot flashes, you're at risk of dying of a heart attack. So it's really important to control these, and not just from a physical aspect, but from a heart aspect. And as you know, heart is the biggest killer of women, and that's what I always look at. And then you have the osteoporosis. I'm getting women with T-scores in the 3s, and they're in their 60s, and then they finally come to me. The horse is already out of the barn. So now we have to try to put back on bone, and that's a much harder thing. So if I were to tell any women, if they're listening, 5 years before menopause and 5 years after, I advocate hormones, but there's other ways to get around it. If you don't have the hot flashes, you're lucky, and possibly you could get by with a lifestyle like making sure you get good nutrition, exercise, low stress. Yes, that's going to happen. Or you can take care of yourself by getting a workup for hormones. And that's usually just getting a blood test, although you can also get saliva or urine tests. I use those, whatever. I have experience with about 500 different physicians pouring into my compounding pharmacy. And so watching the different treatments, I have my favorites and my not so favorites, but I offer all of them to women and at the level that they're comfortable with. Some women are not comfortable with hormones. They've just believed whatever. There's ways of treating women like that. Some women want oral hormones. I'm not a big fan, but I can work with that, and I can protect them from sequelae or problems in the future with oral hormones. And there's all kinds of natural treatments too. It's, again, individualized treatment, but I would tell women to start looking in your perimenopausal time, which is average menopause is around 52 or 51. So, around 45, 46, start taking care of yourself. If you have erratic periods, do something about it. And then after menopause, talk to your doctor about getting hormone support.
So for women that don't want to do any hormonal support, what are some options to help them?
Well, first of all, you got to take care of the heart. So you got to look at all your inflammatory markers. So your homocysteine and your CRP and your thrombus. So those things, and people just look at lipids, your cholesterol, and that is just one marker of inflammation. Watching if you have diabetes or prediabetes. Those are the lifestyle things that you must take care of if you're not going to have hormones. And if you have hot flashes complicating that, then there are some commercial medicines that we can use that are non-hormones. We use some things called Relazin. We use that. I've used Evista. I've used, for osteoporosis, I've used a whole host of things, black cohosh, clover, red clover. There's so many things that we can use, and but exercise and proper nutrition and diet are probably the biggest factors in their heart health. Mm-hmm. So, if you are overweight, trying to lose weight, it's a fact that you're going to gain about 10 pounds after menopause. It's just a fact. But that weight loss will go away in about 5 years if you don't buy into it that I'm going to be overweight. Because many women, here's their problem, they'll gain 10 pounds and then they'll just give up. That 10 pounds is going to be with you, but just, put your head down and say, no, I'm not going to gain any more. So if you can stop it at 10, that's the place where you want to be.
Now, as far as bioidentical hormones, what are the benefits of having them?
Well, the benefits of bioidentical hormones is that their metabolites are better than the synthetic hormones or some of the commercial hormones. The risks are, because they are body natural, bioidentical, body natural, they're made in a lab, certainly, but they're to be used and they're the same as your own hormones. We use them a lot topically, except for progesterone, which is fine to take orally, and there's many benefits for that. So the bioidentical hormones can be customized, and that's one of the best things. A commercial medicine, is 1 dose or 2 doses, and that's it. That's all you get. When you get a bioidentical hormone, then you can, due to symptoms and their lab tests, you can adjust them to the woman. And that's the real strength of bioidentical hormones. And it's good that we do have them available. Commercially, there's really only, there's a lot of estrogens, and I use a lot of commercial estrogens, but there's only one bioidentical hormone in the progesterone and no testosterone available for women. And that is a tragedy. That is a tragedy. Procter & Gamble tried to get a testosterone bioidentical hormone patch onto the market, and they couldn't get it on. So the benefit, again, going back to bioidentical hormones, is they're bioidentical commercial estrogens, but no real good alternatives to progesterone and testosterone. And you need both of those if you're going to do hormone therapy. And this is the missing piece that we don't have commercially.
How would you say that pharmaceutical companies influence the practice of medicine?
First of all, they provide a product, and they've put a lot of thought and money into this. So they become one-sided in tunnel vision that their product is the best. And then they promote that to the medical profession without giving alternatives. And that is too bad, because the doctors, even though this treatment has come out, and it may be innovative, and I'm happy to have innovative things from the big companies, but they're tunnel vision sometimes in that they won't mention other treatments or compare to other treatments unless they can shed a bad light on it. And by right, they want to get their money out of their medication. But at the same time, they do us a disservice by not being full health partners. And if they don't become full health partners by telling us the spectrum of treatment without featuring their product only, then they're not doing the medical profession a favor.
Thank you so much. I thought that was very balanced and a very fair assessment, because I don't think they're out there to get us, and I don't think they're evil, and there are so many drugs that save lives, but at the same time, we need to know about all of the treatments that are out there.
Right. They will minimize their side effects. They are bound to say that to you when they give you a drug, But if you're not perceptive enough, you can come to believe them. And they do have a lot of trust in the medical profession. But then, it's almost, they try to go overboard in it. And we actually need more money invested in research and development and less in retread of old drugs. And unfortunately, they found success in retread of old drugs rather than developing new entities. And I would urge them to try to go out and get new treatments and better results from new drugs.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's such an important thing. And I always like to think about, let's create cures, not customers, because
Right.
some of the medications, they're meant to be lifelong medications. And of course, in some cases, that is a life-saving intervention. But, let's think about what are the root causes of the conditions and how do we solve those?
Right. Let's put more money in research and development and less into marketing.
Right.
And the American public would be in a better shape, the medical profession would be in better shape, and eventually the companies would be in better shape. And they would be positioned better in the world. But unfortunately, that's not the business model.
Yeah, that's so well said. Such an important thing to think about. Because I feel like we're just connecting a lot of dots for people because they may not realize that there's a whole business model to this. And I have a business, you have a business, that capitalism makes the world go round,
Right.
and that's how innovation happens. But at the same time, you want to make sure that you are considering all options and you don't get this tunnel vision.
Right. Don't do the easy thing. Do the hard thing and develop the thing, that one compound that might have a shot of really helping us all, rather than the easy compound that, we can sell this. I think American innovation is incredible, but we've fell backwards because we're doing marketing rather than developing.
Let's see here. So this is something that was given to the practice this is an educational tool. I used to
Right.
work as a pharmaceutical sales
Right.
rep. And one of the things we would do is provide a lot of educational tools.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, this talks about women's health. And this has orthotricycline and orthoevra on there, which are birth control pills.
Mm-hmm.
Orthoevra is a birth control patch and orthotricycline is a birth control pill. And these are being recommended for a lot of women's health
Mm-hmm.
issues. So they're being recommended for polycystic ovarian syndrome,
Mm-hmm.
for menstrual irregularities, you name
Acne.
it, acne,
Right.
a lot of different conditions.
Right.
And there are risk factors with birth control pills that not many people are aware of.
Absolutely. And the other benefit of them is there's a very low rate of ovarian cancer with birth control pills. But the other side of it is I don't think women are told that it can suppress your libido. And it can cause lipid problems, cholesterol problems, and it can actually cause depression. And I think that's not realized in our population. It's the suppression of pregnancy is just so ingrained that, and the options are not discussed. I mean, I am a fan of IUDs because I think of all the options, this is the least problem. And you do have to select the patient, but depression and libido and weight gain are three things that a young woman don't need. And so I think they need to be made aware of that. And I think all options must be laid out. And I don't think women should key in on just take a pill.
I think that was a great thing to end with, coming from a pharmacist who's been a pharmacist for 42 years, and obviously you and I are both pharmacists, and we're passionate about appropriate medication use, and we know we have seen medications save lives. At the same time, medications are just one piece of the puzzle. They're one piece of this bigger picture of what we need to do to get our health back.
Right. I don't think we can focus as pharmacists that we're the only thing that cures that patient. There's so many other things going on, and we're part of the team. Yeah. And if we can help the doctors, help the patients, it's more of a triad. And if we can advise the doctor, advise the patient, and use medications properly, that's important. And we as pharmacists must do our job to advise the patients to use their medicines properly.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing in the world. I really appreciate you, and you're helping so many people. And I'm definitely one of them. So I'm somebody that you've really helped, and you've helped me get my health back. And I don't know if I tell you that enough, but I really appreciate you, and thank you.
I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode on the treatment of thyroid disorders over the years. This can be a really important historical context for understanding why levothyroxine has been the preferred medication used these days, while it might not be the best medication. And hopefully this information helps you advocate for yourselves. If you've enjoyed the Thyroid Pharmacist Healing Conversations podcast, I hope that you'll take the time to subscribe. I have a lot of things I want to share with you that I've learned over the last 10 plus years of helping people take charge of their own health, of healing my own body, and helping others get into remission from Hashimoto's and living their best lives. Next week, we're going to have an episode with the father of biohacking, Dave Asprey, on how to heal your brain from autoimmunity. Many people don't realize, but Dave had a Hashimoto's diagnosis before he became a biohacker. I'll be sharing an episode about low-dose naltrexone, and I'll also be interviewing Dr. Elena Zinkov on utilizing peptides that could be game changers for autoimmunity, for thyroid disease, for brain fog, for fertility, all kinds of symptoms. I can't wait to share the rest of these episodes with you. Please subscribe to the podcast so that you don't miss out on these episodes. And if this episode has been healing and helpful to you, I hope that you'll share it with somebody else that it can help them too. And of course, be sure to go to thyroidpharmacist.com/TTS to sign up to watch The Thyroid Secret in its entirety for free this upcoming weekend. Until next time, I hope this has been a healing conversation on your healing journey.